Well, the Phillies and the Orioles hope they can party like it's 1983.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. I am a podcaster who has been I've been doing this for well over a decade now, and I'm about to start my sixth full season here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter, or whatever the hell it's called now, and Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. So here we go. We're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk about three teams that participated in the 1983 postseason, at least in their current incarnation. The World Series champs that year were the Baltimore Orioles. They defeated the Philadelphia Phillies in the World Series, and they also defeated the Chicago White Sox in that year's American League Championship Series. And they are all in the news today, and all, in the news for quite different reasons. Now, before we get into the show today, we're going to go over the trivia question. And more than one viewer who posted the trivia question answers down here on YouTube and on Twitter, or whatever it's called now, or Instagram. By the way, if you are listening to every single day, be sure to use that hashtag EverydaySully so I know who's listening to us all the time. I asked the question saying, if we consider the Angels to be a Los Angeles team, which I don't. I think they should be called the California Angels, but they call themselves the Los Angeles Angels. If they are indeed a Los Angeles team, then what is the only major league city to host the World Series only one time? And I phrased it like that because, yes, the Washington Nationals only appeared in one World Series, but as my shirt shows, the Senators also played in Washington, and Washington hosted several World Series involving the Senators. I phrase that also because the Milwaukee Brewers have only made it to the World Series one time. But the Milwaukee Braves hosted two World Series. So Milwaukee has hosted several World Series. So I said, what is the only city to just host the World Series one time? Now, the answer that I came up with was Denver, Colorado, because there have been several franchises who've never won the World Series. There have been multiple World Series appearances for teams like the San Diego Padres, like the Tampa Bay Rays. And so I said the only city to host the World Series one time was Denver. Now, and Justin Lamas got that correct. But Big John 08865 pointed this out. And Scott Campbell 9515 got this, pointed this out as well. And that is, yes, the Tampa Bay Rays have indeed played in the World Series twice. However, the second time they played in the World Series was the COVID year. So the city of, St. Petersburg, and it's not the city of Tampa Bay, but the Tampa Bay technically only hosted the World Series one time, 2008. They didn't play in Tampa Bay in the World Series in 2020 because of the COVID regulations. So I can say, hey, they hosted playoff games that year because they did. They played the wild card series involving Tampa Bay. But you're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. So I guess that is a technicality. Uh, Today's trivia question is going to be cut. And did I mention also dry? Uh, so there you go. Good job getting it right, and good job for the corrections. And I realized I thought I was being so clever in how I phrased it, and I didn't keep that in mind. Hey, I'm going to go to a viewer question here, which came actually in the chat during yesterday's show, where I was talking about the Cody Bellinger signing, and I was making a plea for the other Central teams, both the American League and the National League Central, to, hey, let's get in there and start signing some players here. Sign Snell, sign Montgomery. The Red Sox looks like they're continuing to kick the tires on Montgomery, and if he joins the Red Sox rotation won't be bad if Montgomery has a year that we would expect from Montgomery. And if you have a decent rotation, you have a shot to have a winning year. You have a shot to win a year. You have a shot to be a wildcard team. You have a shot to be a wildcard team. You have a shot to go to the World Series. And wouldn't that just shut us Red Sox fans the hell up? But a listener did post something in the chat, which had nothing to do with the show. So I talked about other things. But let's see what Brian Pearson wrote. What do you think about the Phillies so far and the Baltimore Orioles so far? I assume they mean for the postseason and how they've been doing building up to this year. Um, well, both those teams were the World Series participants in 1983, and they both made the playoffs last year. The Orioles looked great going into the playoffs, and Philadelphia was one rally short of getting back to the World Series and probably giving Texas a run for the money if they actually made it. Now, I am let's talk about the Phillies first, because the Phillies had an interesting offseason. Um, their biggest move, in my humble opinion, was making sure that Aaron Nola stays put. Aaron Nola was going to be a highly sought after free agent, a big time ace, probably would have been the type of pitcher that Baltimore would salivate over. And the fact of the matter is, they signed him to a long term deal. So they know they Wheeler and Nola for another year. They have good pitching on this team. Obviously, you have Bryce Harper. Obviously, you have Kyle Schwarber. You have, some superstar power on the team. Now, a lot of Philadelphia fans seem pretty frustrated that the team is not being super aggressive. And why aren't they going after Dylan Cease? Why aren't they going after, more importantly, depth in their bullpen? I think if you need depth in their bullpen, one way you get depth in your bullpen is to strengthen your rotation. Because once you strengthen the rotation, first of all, some pitchers who might be a back end in the rotation could find themselves into the bullpen. But also, if you have a strong rotation, you're not going to wear out your bullpen. I wish more people start to understand. Well, I understand why they don't, because pitchers are expensive. So you create a system with pitchers where you don't have aces that go 6, 7, or 8 innings. But I believe the team that starts to do that, there will be a domino effect that you will have pitchers who go longer. You'll have a healthier bullpen. You won't have these bullpens that are exhausted going into October. I digress. Here's one thing that I will always say, because I've seen him do it with multiple franchises. In Dave Dombrowski, I trust. Now, the one flaw in Dave Dombrowski's entire resume, going back to his days with Montreal, through his World Series championship with the Florida Marlins, with his turning the Detroit Tigers from one of the worst teams in the history of baseball to a regular contender in the postseason, winning a pair of pennants, to delivering another World Series title to Boston, to delivering another pennant to Philadelphia, is that Dombrowski will always pull the trigger. Remember how I condemned Baltimore in last year's trade deadline for clinging to all their prospects when they desperately needed to make a move? Dombrowski's not going to do that. When Dombrowski realizes the window is right now, he will trade everything to win right now. Now, do the Phillies need some depth in their bullpen? I think so. They did make some moves, and I think one of the interesting moves was not a pitcher, but to bring in Whit Merrifield, who was kind of an afterthought as a free agent, but this is a guy who's a multiple stolen base champion, can play the outfield and can play the infield. So he has that complete versatility role that he has. And if you want to look back at the last time he made the All-Star team, you have to go all the way back to last year. Now, he had a bad second half of the season, which soured his market value when he was a free agent with Toronto. You're not asking him to be the superstar. You're asking him to be a good player in that lineup. And I don't think there's a soul who doesn't think that a guy with good power and stolen base abilities, who's been multiple time All-Star and not asked to be the superstar of the team, will be a contributor to the club. I think the Phillies are going to make a deal and they will pull the trigger because they know the time is right now. They know if they had one more decent rally against the Diamondbacks last year, they would be looking at back-to-back pennants, and who knows how they would have done. And Dombrowski knows the time is now, and that's why you bring in Dombrowski. You don't bring Dombrowski in to build a long-term leader for the future. You go in to say, hey, pull the trigger. He would have pulled the trigger in Baltimore because he said, I don't care about these hundreds of prospects that we have, that there's no way we can fit all of them onto the team. So let's use some of these and flip them over to be a good, a good squad. Take a look at the East. I think the Phillies are much better than the Mets right now. And the Mets, I think, are in a quasi rebuild, which I think is smart for them. I think they're much better than the Marlins, who, while they're a decent team, they have a ton of injuries going in right now. You lose Sandy Alcantara, and I'm not quite sure if they're going to be reducing the payroll of that team. They've already lost Jorge Soler. You know that they're better than the Washington Nationals. So the only team they're really worried about in that division is the Atlanta Braves. I think the Phillies are better than every single team in the National League Central. So do I think they're better than San Francisco, San Diego, or Arizona? Well, that's going to be their main competition for the wild card. And we all know just punch your card and you get in. Dombrowski knows that, and you know that he's going to take a look at the team. They're going to break camp, and when it becomes clear there's a hole in the squad, guess what they're going to do? They're going to fix it. And this is one thing this guy knows how to do. Now, their other partner in that 1983 World Series and in that sort of mid-Atlantic region of the country also had an interesting postseason, and one that is definitively more impactful than the one that Philadelphia had. Who are we talking to today? I'll tell you exactly who we're talking to. We're going to talk to our friends at eBay Motors. And I am telling you, some people have asked me, is eBay Motors really the right place to go, Sully? Some of my friends have asked me about, hey, look, I need stuff for my car. I need to maintain my vehicle. It's my ride or die. And I need peak performances. I got superchargers I need. I've got roof racks I need. I've got exhaust kits, LED lights, and more that I need. And I said, wait a second, what's a supercharger? But it doesn't matter if I know what a supercharger is. They know it at eBay Motors. eBay Motors has all of that covered. They got over 122 million parts, and I'm assuming one of them is a supercharger, and they will fit your car perfectly. And you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. 122 million parts give you a pretty wide delta there. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need and all the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only and exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to United States customers. This is a reminder that Locked On has created the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's now available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on free Fire TV channels app. I was very harsh on the Baltimore Orioles in their trade deadline debacle that they had last year. They went on to be a 100-win team and instantly got bounced because they didn't address the main issue they had in last year's season, which was they needed a frontline starter. They didn't have a frontline starter. Their pitching got bombed. They got bounced in 3 games, and the team that beat them went on to win the World Series. That's right. The Rangers went on to beat the Astros. Could the Orioles have beat the Astros with one really good starting pitcher? I don't know, and neither do you. But I also felt there was a sense of urgency, not just because the Red Sox and Yankees were out of it last year, but knowing that management, they weren't going to spend the money. Knowing that management, their windows of opportunity were quite small. We talked about that a little bit with Kansas City the other day, that you have that tiny window of opportunity. And if you don't have the manager that's going to extend that and really go for it, then what the hell are we even doing? The fact that they have new management, I've talked about this before, just is a spectacular opening of possibilities in Baltimore. Beyond just the product on the field, the fact that they acquired Corbin Burns for a hell of a lot less than anyone thought they were going to shows that this is a new era in Baltimore. And guess what would happen? If they go in and they try to sign Burns to a big pile of money, and they did not touch any of their top prospects, they didn't touch the Rutschmans, they didn't touch the Pollocks or any of the top players they had in their farm system or their young players on the field, and they got a top flight starter in Burns. If they wind up re-signing him, then they've got him for so little. And one of the things that could really energize this franchise is the fact that it's a sleeping giant. The Orioles play in Baltimore. Is Baltimore as big as Philadelphia? No, it's not as big as Washington either. However, they are the team that owns the media station that also shows Nationals games, but they're a sleeping giant. The Nationals are probably going to stink. And there's a lot of Oriole fans who are dying to get excited and dying to have them say, this is our team. We're not Philadelphia. We're not Washington. We're Baltimore. And there's a certain pride that goes there. And the Orioles used to be one of the great marquee franchises. If we can see that fan base energized and also people rediscovering Camden Yards, we saw that every time Camden Yards gets full because they get good again, it's rocking. And there's a whole generation of people looking around for the first time, going to Camden Yards and feeling the levels of excitement there. That energy and the possibilities with the Santanders and everyone there all contributing big time to the team. The Grayson Rodriguez, all these people are now the young players. Now you're adding a couple of veterans to the squad. And I would love them to make one more big move. Hell, go after Snell. You throw in another starting pitcher in there. You don't have to touch any of the prospects. They still have this giant cauldron of stars who are ready to percolate up and populate the team that already won a division title, already won 100 games. They just got their butts kicked by Texas, but that happens. How do I think they're doing? I mean, we had on, Clayton, Clayton Fletcher, my good friend, the comedian, on the podcast to talk about this. But I think the excitement also of those two teams, Philadelphia and Baltimore, the excitement of that, the star power of those two teams being so close to each other, having that energy in the possible. Are we going to meet in the World Series? Are we going to do that? I think this is a phenomenal offseason for the Orioles, who are opening up massive avenues of possibilities, not just to win on the field, but to win the hearts and minds and to maybe ignite an Orioles fan base that is, let's face it, just drooling for a champion. Hey, it's time to talk about our friends over at FanDuel, because FanDuel was, and always shall be America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel is the official sportsbook partner of the National Basketball Association. Reminder, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's now available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV's channel app. Okay, there was a bit of news revolving around the proposed stadium in Chicago, and there was leaked out these renderings of what looked like an absolutely remarkable entertainment center stadium, state of the art stadium for the White Sox that would be in the South Loop near downtown. You can see the Sears, I'm calling it the Sears Tower, I can't remember what the hell it's called now, near the river, and not that far north from where the White Sox play now. It's not like you're putting them all the way out in, I don't know, in Joliet. You're not putting them out in Evansville. You're not putting them out in Homewood. You're putting them right in the center of the city, but only about, what, a couple miles north from where Guaranteed Rate Field is right now for the White Sox. It's not completely displacing the team and making it a brand shiny new jewel in the center of Chicago. It looks amazing, and the plan looks amazing, and it'll cost $1 billion. It'll cost $1 billion with a B. And yeah, it's tough to, and when you read more about it, and that they want to extend the tax that helped refurbish Soldier Field. There's still $50 million to pay off of Guaranteed Rate Field. Look, it's a beautiful drawing, but again, there are also beautiful drawings of stadiums in Oakland, and with lots of crucial services needed in Chicago. They really have $1 billion to spend there? I don't care what tax or bonds you're doing. I mean, I don't think you should ever use public money for a stadium because it's not a public work. It's not like infrastructure of transportation or a school or paving roads or paying for maintenance workers or whatever. It's a palace for a billionaire and not for public use. You buy a ticket, but it's not like a public park they're building. And I think what's happening, and I'm not the only person to think this, that they are making this proposal and saying, hey, here's our plan for the White Sox, huh? It costs $1 billion. Oh, well, hey, the state didn't want to pay for it. And I have a feeling the White Sox are going to go. I'm not saying I want them to, but it may be the case that Chicago is in a two-team market. I mean, I want the White Sox to stay, just like I wanted the A's to stay. But the A's thing is completely emotional. I wanted the A's to stay because I like being in the Bay Area with two teams playing there. And I've always had a soft spot in my heart for the White Sox. And, I just did that video about why the A's left Philadelphia and why the Phillies didn't. Well, in that same period of time when most cities were discovering they couldn't support two teams, at that time, the White Sox were the team setting attendance records, and they wound up going to the World Series in 1959. If they had bad attendance then, probably the White Sox would have moved elsewhere. And I did a video outside of Guaranteed Rate Field where I went over the fact that they almost moved to Milwaukee. They almost moved to Seattle. They almost moved to Tampa Bay. And the fact of the matter is, the possible sketchy deal in the late 80s kept the White Sox in Chicago for three. They were going to move in the early 90s. They were there for the 90s. They were there for the 2000s. They were for the 2010s. And midway through the 2020s, there'll probably any move involving the White Sox will be at the end of this decade. They've added close to half a century of memories there, including a World Series title. I think it would stink if the White Sox move. I also stink if the A's move, but it might come to that. And as much as that would stink, let's praise something about baseball. Franchise stability. From the mid-1950s till around the mid-1970s, there was all sorts of crazy movement of franchises Giants, the Dodgers, the Braves, the Browns, the Senators twice, the expansion into New York, into Houston, into Dallas, moving the Braves from Boston, Milwaukee to Atlanta, moving the A's from Philadelphia to Kansas City, and Kansas City to uh, Oakland. The moving the second Senators to Texas, putting a team in San Diego, and almost moving them to Washington, and finally moving the Expos. All it was just all this chaos. But I stopped to think about this. Baseball has been pretty stable. There has been no expansion this century. None. We're nearly a quarter of the way through this century, and there's been no expansion. We've had the same number of teams since 1998. There's been some realignment, there's been change in the playoffs, but there's been no new teams, which I believe there probably should be an expansion. As I said, you create 4 8-team divisions and create a geographic realignment. That being said, even if they keep National League, American League, it's been a while since we've had any expansion. And also, in terms of team movement, I'm about to turn 52. I've been around for over half a century. In my lifetime, not even using the rule of 7, where you don't make your first memories until you're around 7 years old, your first sports memories. In my lifetime, from when I was in a baby in the cradle in Mansfield Center, Connecticut, one franchise has moved. One. In my lifetime. In over half a century, there's been one franchise move in baseball. When the Expos became the Washington Nationals. That's it. There's a couple of teams that have been renamed. The Guardians and the Marlins went from Florida to Miami. The Angels moved from California to Anaheim to Los Angeles, of Anaheim to Los Angeles, all staying in the same address. But the rest of baseball, with the exception of that, no one's moved. And technically, the A's haven't either. They're still going to play in Oakland next year, and we don't know for sure if they're playing in Las Vegas. Now, think about how many teams have moved around in football. Hell, the Rams in my lifetime moved from LA to St. Louis back. The Raiders moved from Oakland to Los Angeles to Oakland to Las Vegas. The football Cardinals moved from moved from St. Louis to Arizona. The Colts moved from Baltimore to Indianapolis. The Browns moved from Cleveland to Baltimore, became the Ravens. There have been all sorts of, the Chargers moved from San Diego up to Los Angeles. There's been all sorts of crazy moves going around. Basketball has moved all over creation. In my lifetime, I remember Kansas City moving to Sacramento, Vancouver moving to Memphis, Seattle moving to Oklahoma City. I'm probably forgetting a few. And forget hockey. They're ping-ponging all over the place. Quebec to Colorado, and Atlanta to Winnipeg, and Winnipeg to Phoenix, and Colorado to New Jersey, and Hartford to Carolinas, and all this stuff going around. Baseball stayed pretty secure. So if there is a franchise move or two, it may stink. But we've had over half a century of only one team moving in Major League Baseball. That's not bad. That's not bad. I don't want the White Sox to move, and I don't want the A's to move. I don't want any team to move. But do you know what? If they do, it's not like it's a regular occurrence. And one thing that is a regular occurrence is me doing these podcasts and asking trivia question, which today's trivia question is going to be more cut and dry than the one I did yesterday. And that is very simple. What pitcher threw to date, which is now the 27th day of February 2024, to date, who has thrown the last postseason complete game loss? That used to happen a lot. They'd go the distance. And by the way, if it's that an 8-inning complete game counts if there's no bottom of the ninth. I'm counting it. Complete game. Who was the last one to get a complete game loss in the postseason? That, my friends, is today's trivia question. Put it down here at Lockdown MLB on YouTube, Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter, or whatever the heck it's called now on Instagram. I am your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Wondering if we're going to party like 1983, and wondering if teams might finally move for only the second time in the last half century. This has been Locked On MLB. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.